Hello, everybody. My name is Vonteia, and here is another one of my audiobooks I made. This one I actually have not even finished because I still have a bunch more chapters to do on it, so maybe that will happen further down the line. But please enjoy The Cavalier's Promise, my audiobook.
Epilogue. A sharply dressed group of men are sitting at a booth in a crowded bar. It's raining outside. The rain is making a tiny noise on the roof above them. There were 6 of them in this group. The saloon was filled with a lot of scary-looking figures, like prisoners and/or outlaws waiting to be caught. Outside of the bar, a young man approaches the saloon covering his head with the head of a barrel. The young man was dressed in a dirty white button-up. He enters and pushes through the outlaws and scum of the West. After he pushes through, he gets to the bar. The bartender slides over to the young man. They're just through the beaded door. He pushes through to the beaded door and passes through the door. The one in the middle of the group of sharply dressed men looks up from his glass. "So have you thought of your decision?" says the one in the middle of the sharply dressed men, with a smile of devilish intent, and giggles a little. "Yes," says the young man scaredly and quivering and wet. The sharply dressed man smirks and extends out his hand and chuckles. The young man shakes his hand hastily. The man in the tux laughs and stands up, push up from the table. Chapter 1. New Beginning 40 years later. 4 men are riding on horseback. The 4 men all had names. There was Jimmy, Kenneth, Seth, and Joe. Joe was a normal soul, worked as a cowboy, who had nothing much special about him. He was the basic man. Jimmy was a mystery type that they did know. He had a large amount of wealth and hired them to go on this expedition with him. Little was known about him. Kent was a free slave from the South, tall, strong physically, strong-willed as well, determined, was freed and ran up north. Because he had such bad racist folk chasing him, Seth was an Irish immigrant who ran here viva being snuck in on a boat in a barrel of fish. These 4 men had word that a man named the Cavalier was up here. The Cavalier was a messenger of sources, but the only thing he delivered was bullets or corpses. A famous bounty hunter and/or gun for hire of the West, also known as the West Wind due to the speed of which he could ride off at, and would never get caught by the cops, or also known as the boogeyman of the West, because he struck fear into many men and women of the West by the actions that he had committed. It started to rain. The group of 4 pulled up to a cabin, and an old man was sitting on the porch. He was being covered by the roof of the porch. He was sleeping in a rocking chair. Joe started with the old man still on top of his horse. "Excuse me, old sir, would you happen to know where the Cavalier is located?" asked Joe. Tipped his hat after the statement. The old man woke up a little, startled, and regained consciousness. Then Kenneth chimed in. He held up the poster. "Yes, sir. We got word from some men up north that had made his way down south." The old man got up off the chair slowly and achingly looked at the poster, then looked back at the group. The old man said, "You gentlemen look what come on," and just then Seth interrupted. "Listen, we don't have the time for ya bullshit, old rag." Joe looked over to Seth, and Joe shouted, "Now that will be enough." He looked back at the old man and continued, "We would love to, sir." They all got off their horses and hitched them up to the side of the house on the horse hitch, and entered one by one. The old man put his hand in front of Kenneth and looked at Joe. "By the way, Is this man a free man, or—" Kenneth interrupted the old man and reassured him by saying, "Yes, sir, as free as the west wind blows." Only Kenneth laughs at the joke, and the old man gives a stern look back at Kenneth. He puts his arm slowly to his side. Kenneth's laughter turns to embarrassment as he walks through the door. After everyone was inside, they all got to sitting down. Joe was the first to enter and sat on a bench. The old man walked over and sat next to Joe. Kenneth sat on the floor next to the fire to warm up from the wetness of the outdoors. Jimmy was looking out the window at the ever-growing rain, and Seth sat next to Joe on his other side. Where the old man was sitting, the darkness grew, and the only thing lighting up all of their faces was the flame of the red fire. Joe looked over at the old man, put his hands, folded, into his lap, and started to talk. "Mister, we were just wondering if you had known the whereabouts of a man—" The old man interrupted by putting up one finger. "What are y'all? Fine men's stories," Seth exclaimed in a harsh tone towards the old man. "Excuse me." Joe gave Seth a look that calmed him down. Joe continued, "What do you mean, stories? And why do you care?" The old man replied, whilst stroking his white beard of straggly hair, "Well, I mean, what are your stories?" "Every good man has a story, don't they?" the old man says with a smile. Jimmy turns and irritatedly says, "We don't have time for this." The old man looked at Jimmy and was puzzled. He said, "Haven't I met you somewhere?" Jimmy quickly turns around and looks out the window. Kenneth stands and smiles. "Nonsense. Hello, sir, my name is Kenneth Queen, and am an ex-slave from the South." The old man looks over at Kenneth. "I figured as much," says the old man with a stern glare at Kenneth. Kenneth's smile turns into a frown, and he sits back down and stares into the fire. The old man walks over to a cabinet and pulls out a bottle of whiskey, pours a glass, and walks over to Seth. "How about you, young man?" He pats on Seth's shoulder. "I ain't telling you shite," he yells, and smacks his hand off his shoulder and stands where he is eye to eye with the man. Joe stood, and Joe exclaimed, "Seth, that's not how to treat this man. Will let us in his house." Seth said in rebellious, "Though we don't know him, and he doesn't know us." He turns to the old man, who is leaned up on the table from the glass back of Seth. "I don't trust you either, you daft cunt." He looks up at Seth with a slight giggle. "How about a drink then?" says the old man, slightly laughing. Joe got in between them. "That's awfully nice of you," said Joe before Seth interrupted again with, "Oh, no, no, no. I'm not falling for this old man shite. First you asked for my story, and then you're offering me a drink to lube me up. Well, not going to happen, old rag." The old man looked up to everyone, then out a window to his right, and then looked back down at his drink. "Well, I knew this was going to happen." Everyone looks at the old man, and their faces go pale out of worry. The old man downs the whiskey, and to think, he looks at Joe. They lock eyes from what feels like forever. Joe looks back puzzled. "I thought you guys were all good kids," Seth says questionably, but still enraged. "What do you mean by that?" Suddenly the old man pulled out a 6-shooter and shot Seth right in the shoulder. "What I mean is, I thought you guys would have found out sooner." He laughs to himself and puts the gun down on the table. The door slams open from a violent wind, from the searing storm that was swelling outside, and the old man took the chance and darted out of the house. Joe rushes over to pick up Seth and cover the wound. Jimmy runs after the old man, and so does Kenneth. Seth looks up at Joe. "Go kill that son of a bitch," said Seth, who was bleeding profusely. "What about you?" said Joe, petrified in fear, to Seth as he coughed. Seth's eyes rolled to the back of his head and became limp. Joe sets Seth down gently. Joe picks up the old man's gun on the table and runs out the door.